Hi everyone, welcome to the Anthropocene. I didn't know I'd have to do it myself. This video is designed to complete the shift to taking people to a new level of being able to understand how the world order is really evolving. Well, here we are on the Anthropocene. Since the AWG failed to pass their paper in March, I wrote an article which shows we are in terms of social history, and you can get it free on Medium. There's a link on my Facebook page, and you can also read the whole article at the top of the freelance articles on the articles page on my website. It shows that as the periods of life on Earth have been inseparable from periods in the Earth's geological history since early plant life turned the primordial atmosphere, which was created by volcanic outgassing, into the oxygenated environment for later organisms to evolve in, due to the photosynthetic processes they established. Hence, life on Earth has always been regarded as adding new layers of activity to the planet, which geologists call strata. And hence, as all the evolutionary periods have led into human history, human periods of evolution are automatically classified as new geological ages. Currently, the first stage, in which the early hominid species appeared, lasting about 3 million years, it shows the appearance of Homo sapiens over the last 100,000 years, and since then they've been the only surviving hominid species. So that is the Pleistocene, and then that becomes the Holocene over the last 11,000 years, following the discovery of farming and the domestication of animals. Hence the proposed Anthropocene, literally meaning human age, is becoming the third major period in which a fully integrated global society is appearing through the rise of the internet and satellites providing an overview, which we can see people functioning in a more objective way. So we can talk about the problems with the way human society as a whole has evolved out of history in terms of what we can now see from this overview, meaning that we are no longer living in the subjective state which is characterized by the way the Pleistocene led into the Holocene, as we have developed more advanced societies along the way. So in other words, the politics have changed because the state of human existence has changed. While previously we were living in societies which were struggling for survival, often against each other because of overlapping agendas and unregulated on a global level in terms of their ambitions and social beliefs, we have now created an interconnected legal framework of businesses and social groups which is covered by international law. So we still have problems with the framework of nations which exists under the UN system, from which we can see the difference between the early Anthropocene, or rather we will see the difference between the early Anthropocene, in which we're still visibly solving the problems of the Holocene, and what will become the later Anthropocene, which should look more like the Symbiocene, which is the term proposed for the period after that, as we're living more in harmony with each other and the planet. So of course the big question is, what are the timescales for these new periods, and what can we predict from the way humanity has evolved? There are around 33 developed nations in the world today which all believe we are in the period of perfecting the nation state, such as the UK, France and Holland. But there are also many other countries which do not see the situation this way, and that is why the revolutionary element seems to carry on. The problem is that many industrialized countries happened in the same area in the West and Japan in the East before the rest of Asia and Africa. So, I mean, if you can say Africa, even really industrialized at all. So the problem is mainly that industrialization did not happen in an equal way, and various long-term trends in social inequality have appeared, which can be exploited politically. And this is probably the reason why the West would most like to see this problem solved. But for the hundreds of millions of people living in poverty, it's a daily reality. So the social imperative, which we could associate with the former communist bloc to want to solve the problem by counterbalancing Western influence, is going to keep making the situation antagonistic due to the demand for solutions, which is going to carry on, but in a way which conflicts with Western interests. So West and China currently competing over influence in Africa. South America largely came under US control. So the kind of inequality continues. So, like the war in Ukraine, for example, which suggests a major confrontation between BRICS and NATO over the next 10 years if action is not taken. However, steps are being made towards solving the problem of this phase we're in the sense that everything is going on computer. So there will be no difficulty in proving the case for things when they arise, because a lot of the momentum for this conflict is coming from the social movements of the 20th century, that is communism in the East and capitalism, fascism in the West, due to the need to protect the world from outright revolution. So we can see this in today's politics. The fact that we are still having these crises like the war on terror, Ukraine, and the proposed annexation of Taiwan by China is a bit of a smokescreen, really, when the actual geopolitical situation is very tightly under control. Really, what we're talking about now is that the world system is evolving beyond the point where we're just simply talking about events as having evolved out of history. And we're talking about the way that we're choosing to our reaction to crises and events, and the way that governments are choosing course of action. And really, this indicates that we're no longer in the Holocene, and because we're no longer in the postmodern age, and there's nowhere for the Holocene logically to go after the postmodern age. So the situation here involving the Anthropocene is very much a case of it being a very different situation from what happened at the end of World War II, when there was the whole problem was the way that the world had evolved out of history, and the UN system was all designed to take the world away from that way of thinking. That the previous few hundred years was the Mongol Empire, the European world economy, and then that all collapsed into World War One. So it was one side of Asia, then it was one-sided Europe, and they needed to rebuild the whole framework of nations. So we could say at that point that we have the problem of the way that events have evolved out of the past, and we could say now that we've got to the point where we've solved the problem of the way events are simply evolving out of the past, as nobody has any control over the world order as a whole. So by breaking it down into parts and compartmentalizing the issue, as the current system has done, it has eventually solved the problem. Of course, new problems have appeared. So I think there's definitely an argument for the Megalian drought crisis theory, because what is this irrational power that's driven the world to such a point? It does not appear logical that humans would do this to themselves voluntarily. Indeed, it is just the way global society has evolved through the component parts we call the empires of history. But after 2 world wars, there is a good reason to believe that this has the real potential to tear global society apart again, which goes back to what I said about the UN and national systems need to be active at all times, producing a type of global society which seems to be consumed by its own issues and ignoring real problems like poverty and inequality, even though in theory we are solving the problem over time, as this method enables progress to occur. So we need people to believe in the system and all the crazy problems it has while it evolves over time, even though this is what's causing the radical, revolutionary and fundamentalist theory behind terrorism. So the new question is how we can come to terms with ourselves, really, in terms of what we've done and how we intend to perpetuate the situation.